So once again, just like I said a few years ago when I read The God Is Not Willing, us Malazan fans are fortunate enough that we continue to get new stories set in the Malazan world. This is the latest one, No Life Forsaken, book 2 of the Witness trilogy, which is now not a trilogy anymore, but it's the direct sequel to The God Is Not Willing. Although while reading it, part of me was thinking this is a sequel to Fall of Light, because there's a lot of characters from Fall of Light that pop up in here, which is really interesting. And I wonder if the author sort of had in his mind that he was going back to Carcanis and he was going back to work on Walk in Shadow, and that's why these characters are popping up, or if these characters popped up in this book and that sort of spurred him to go back and revisit Carcanis. Because I believe right now he's working on Walk in Shadow, the final book of Carcanis. And then there's supposedly still 2 more books of this series to come out. But I don't want to get greedy and I don't want to think too far ahead. I'm just very grateful we have books like this that have come out. So whereas the last one, The God Is Not Willing, focused a lot on sort of themes of climate change and natural disaster and sort of the role of military and what should the role of a military be in a society, while also touching on themes of faith and relationships between gods and mortals and those worshipped and the worshippers. This book is much more about that religious side, the questions of faith, of what does it mean to be part of a religion or a cult? What are the reasons for that? Why do people have beliefs? Why do people organize themselves into organized faiths? And sort of his more cynical take is that, for the most part, people in positions of power, whether it be secular or in a religion, are just there for the power for the most part. And I was looking forward to seeing more of the sort of the religion or the faith, the cult that's cropped up around Coltane, and references to Aaron outside the Fall and whatnot that I mentioned in my last video on The God Is Not Willing. But they weren't really the focus of this book. This book mentioned them. It also mentioned the Karsi, these sort of followers of Karsa Orlong, who they're trying to worship as a god, but that god is not willing. He's not sort of accepting them as worshippers and accepting himself as a divine being. That god is not willing. That was the last book. But the main sort of cult in this book is the cult of Shaik, or Vashaik as she's known now. The cult of the Apocalypse, Whirlwind, Durijna, all that stuff from Seven Cities that we saw in the Book of the Fallen. So yes, we're back in Seven Cities. Really cool that we had Genebacus, now we have Seven Cities. We're getting sort of the main continents. It'd be neat if we had more Darujistan and maybe some Kwantali, Malaz Island, Unta sort of settings, but the fact that we get some Seven Cities and we've had Genebacus in this new series is really cool. Now you'll have to forgive me, I really missed out on one of the biggest sort of, not twists, but the biggest parts of this book, biggest sort of reveals, hints, secrets, whatnot. Totally went over my head, and I did not pick up on it until I read about it online after finishing the book. And it really pains me because I wish I would have sort of figured this thing out on my own, and I think I would have really been much more into the book had I made this connection earlier. So let me set the scene. We have the prologue, and we have this character named Hasten Thenu. Hasten Thenu. And I really misinterpreted this prologue. So this guy, Hasten Thenu, he's in the Imperial Warren. He's looking around and sort of contemplating on the past and how we know the Imperial Warren is what remains of the continent of Jakaruku that had been decimated by the series of mages that were trying to combat High King Kalor, who was an absolute tyrant. And so the whole continent was wiped out and it was swept away into this Imperial Warren. So Hasten Thenu, he's looking around, and he sort of concentrates on one of these piles of bones, and he somehow manages to travel back in time, and he actually witnesses Kalor creating these sort of barrows or these heaps of bones. And he questions Kalor, like, why are you doing this? You're supposed to be the tyrant that you're sort of the reason all of these people are dead is because of you. Or is it a sort of a guilt that you're feeling? Are you trying to, is this a sort of penance that you're doing? And Kalor makes mention of grief, and grief takes many forms, or something like that. And then he comes back to the present. So this guy, Hasten Thenu, I'm immediately thinking, oh, he's some kind of an elder god that can time travel, maybe some sort of Azathanai. He has the ability to time travel. He must be very special. Some new elder god that we haven't heard of before. Then back in the present, in the Imperial Warren, he meets with Cotillion. Cotillion asks him, Hasten Thenu, tell me the story of Karsa Orlong. And so Hasten Thenu's like, all right, but it's going to take place in Seven Cities, and it's not really going to be involving Karsa Orlong, but we'll get there. Cotillion makes reference to the fact that Shadow Throne's interested in how an elder god got involved in all this. And so that line made me immediately think, oh, Hasten Thenu is this elder god that somehow got involved in this story in 7 cities. So I am not thinking that Hasten Thenu is anyone but a totally new character, an elder god that we've never heard of before. But of course, the elder god that Cotillion is referring to is not Hasten Thenu. Hasten Thenu is never mentioned as an elder god. This is just what my brain immediately picked up on in the first pages of the book and sort of ran with for the whole story. Now, there were times later on when I started thinking like, wait, do we know this guy? And I'm jumping ahead, but I'm going to I need to reveal my thought process of figuring out who Hasten Thenu is. So getting through the book, we get to some sections on the Marines. Now, No Life Forsaken has a lot less of the Marines than The God Is Not Willing, which was very, very focused on the Marines, which is fine. I kind of expected it to be more of the same, but this one, the Marines play a role, but kind of a side role, I guess I'd say. Anyways, one of the Marines is named Corporal Hasten Thenu, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, the Elder God, maybe he's pulling a Mael, and he's sort of living a life as sort of a mortal human, just for something to do. And he's referred to by the other people as a corporal who's not a corporal, the corporal not corporal Hasten Thenu. So, you know, they know that there's more to this guy. I'm like, oh, that's because he's this time-traveling elder god. Then there's another scene where there's a mention of the Book of the Fallen, like an actual Book of the Fallen in universe, which is really interesting. And they talk about the fall of the crippled god, or the ascension of the crippled god, and make mention of a certain dancer named not dancer, but a dancer named Lostariel. Now, no one knows that it's Lostariel except for the internal dialogue of Hasten Thenu. And that starts me thinking, wait, how does this Hasten Thenu, how does he know so much about the Unwitnessed, the Bone Hunters, and the Crippled God, the Book of the Fallen? Maybe he's just an elder god, so he has this knowledge, or maybe I'm starting to think, is he one of these characters that we've known in the past? And so my mind immediately goes to Ruthen Good. Why? Because we don't really know what the heck Ruthen Good is. He's referred to as an elder. He's super magical. He's been around forever. So I'm thinking, is Hasten Thenu Ruthen Good? There's another scene where Mael and Hasten Thenu meet, and Hasten Thenu refers to Mael as Azathani, not Elder God. He calls him Azathani. And so even Mael's like, who are you? Like, no one calls me that. People call me Elder God. So, like, you have extra knowledge. I'm going to figure out who you are. So the fact that Mael didn't recognize him makes me start thinking maybe he's not an Azathani. Maybe he's not an Elder God. Maybe this Hasten Thenu is some other character. And so that sort of reinforced in my mind, could it be Ruthen Good? Oh boy. And then finally, the last piece of evidence is that at one point at the end of the book, Hasten Thenu mentions to another character that, hey, I used to be a priest in the Shadow cult. I used to be a priest in a Temple of Shadow. And for like a split second, I thought, oh, Quickben was a Shadow priest. And then Hasten Thenu says, oh, I've also been priests in many different temples and many different cults. And sort of immediately sort of throws that idea in my head of him being Quickben out the window. Never once did I make the connection that the word hasten means to be quick. So yes, I read the whole book and then looked online, and everyone's like, oh, it is so cool that Quickben has been in this novel. And I was totally surprised and flabbergasted, and I wish I would have made that connection earlier. And having read this book, realizing that this sort of character who's not really a big main character but plays a very important role behind the scenes, if I had known this is Quickben, that would have been so cool. But I totally missed out on that whole thing. Anyway, so that's my explanation of how I missed out on Quickben in this book. Back to the prologue. So Hasten Thenu says that he's going to tell Cotillion the story of Karsa, and it's going to involve these events in 7 cities. And that's another reason I thought, oh, Hasten Thenu, he's sort of like he's our narrator. He's the one narrating the story. So maybe he's this sort of the fill-in for the author, the author's character and voice in this story. But alas, I was so wrong. The second part of the prologue involves our good friend Iskarl Pust and his mule. And he has a massive hook that he hooks into the massive corpse of a dead horse, which is then tossed into the Sea of Rariku. And what does he pull up after baiting this massive hook with a massive dead horse but the Elder God Mael himself? Which later on Mael mentions, like, I kind of couldn't resist that. Like, he threw a whole horse in as bait. Like, of course I'm gonna bite. And so Iskarl makes a sort of request in his own crazy, insane way on behalf of Shadow Throne to Mael to, we find out later, it's to flood the underquarter of Gdanispan. There's this sort of underground city, because these cities are sort of cities built on cities built on cities. This place has been occupied for thousands of years. So there's lots of catacombs and tunnels and old streets and alleyways that are underneath. Anyway, Shadow Throne wants him to flood it. Why? Because it's Shadow Throne, and him and Cthullian seem to be involved in affairs once again. Is it to help the Empire? Is it for some greater scheme? Probably a greater scheme, but it also kind of helps the Empire out as well. Chapter 1, we meet a couple characters. We meet our new adjunct, Inkaras Solit. So we have a new adjunct, and his lover / bodyguard, Captain Hadlin. And I don't know if it's like a requirement that all adjuncts are gay, but I thought it was kind of funny that every adjunct we've seen so far has been gay. We also meet the High Fist Arenfall, Arenfall is another one that I've got theories on. So Arenfall is the son of someone who fought in Corbollo Dom's army. Never a named character. It's not Corbollo Dom or Chemist Rouleau himself. Not Malak Rel, it's someone in that rebellious army. But Jilan himself he's a High Fist, he's on the side of the Malazans, so he's sort of against the rebellion. Even though Corbollo Dom wasn't really with the rebellion, he was using the rebellion. Anyways, doesn't matter. So we have this High Fist. He's also an superb master assassin, and he's super fast. He's got the nickname Blinker. You blink and he's right behind you, and there's sort of questions of why he's never joined the Claw, and he plays it off as, well, the Emperor sort of needs someone around that's not in the Claw, but that has the ability to sort of take out the Claw if we need to clean house sort of thing. And they mentioned Kalam doing that in Malaz City, although I don't think Kalam was more trying to survive. He wasn't clearing house on behalf of anyone, although he did end up helping out Malak Rel by wiping out all the Claw loyal to Lysine. Anyways, that's a totally other book. So this Jilan guy, Jilan Arenfall, I'm thinking maybe, potentially, and we'll come back to this at the end of the book, I think he might be Grub from the Book of the Fallen. Grub was a foundling, picked up by the Bone Hunters, presumably had parents who were in the rebellion in Seven Cities. And we know from epigraphs in the Book of the Fallen that in the later Empire, Grub becomes the first sword of the Empire. And now, we haven't heard from a Grub yet in this sort of timeline, 10 years post Book of the Fallen. And if he would keep the name Grub, I mean, he might if he's a Malazan, but it feels weird to have the first sword of the Malazan Empire, Grub. But potentially. So I'm thinking this Jilan Arenfall might be Grub. And we'll get to some sort of more evidence at the end of the book. So Inkaras Solat, this new adjunct, he kind of reveals that, I don't think he reveals to Jilan, but he reveals to the audience, and Jilan kind of figures it out, that he is there to assassinate Arenfall. So Arenfall's super popular, super capable, and he's a High Fist. So those are the 3 deadly sins in the Malazan Empire. So Emperor Malak Rel is like, we have to get rid of this guy. There's also a rebellion is going to pop up again in Seven Cities, because it's Seven Cities and they hate Malazan rule. So there's another rising that's about to happen. So that's why this adjunct is there, to deal with it. And if Arenfall manages to put it down, great. He's still going to kill Arenfall. If he fails, then there's this excuse for killing Arenfall. So Arenfall's sort of dead either way. So back to Arenfall being a Claw, or not being a Claw. It's actually revealed that he has Talon working for him. So Talon have been super secret and barely even there in all of these books. But I do remember at the end of The God Is Not Willing, Ohms doesn't outright say he's a Talon, but he makes mention that Claw do not deal with internal affairs. That is the purview of the Talon. And should Malak Rel get a bit too big for his boots, the Talon will be there to shut him down. So we've known that the Talon are around, and that end of that last book sort of what had me thinking in terms of Talon for this book. And lo and behold, we've got the Talon. Now, even more interesting is that Arenfall is not the Talon master, but one of his chief Talon assassins, Satala, makes reference to a female character who is leading them. So that's something about her orders, or she wants us to do this. And immediately, just from that one pronoun, I'm thinking it's Tavor. Tavor is the Talon master, and is working sort of behind the scenes on behalf of the Empire, which is kind of crazy. Like, after what Tavor went through in the Book of the Fallen, it'd be nice for her story to be wrapped up and finished and not see her again. But equally, I would love to see her again and see more of a sort of an older Tavor. Chapter 2, we have assassin battles on the rooftops of Gdanispan. So this is all taking place in the city of Gdanispan, one of the cities of 7 cities. But is it one of the 7? Who knows? So Satala and the Talons, Arenfall's Talons, are going out and they're dealing with the assassins of the rebellion. So Vashaik's has, well, they're hers, but Vashaik's assassins are on the rooftops trying to fight against the Malazans. There is also a hand of Claw that has come into the city with the adjunct, ostensibly to kill or assassinate Arenfall, but they're not involved yet. They're just getting settled in, so it's Talon versus Vashaik cultists. Satala, one of Arenfall's best Talons, manages to take out a whole bunch of these assassins, and then she sits down on the rooftop next to this seemingly unimportant, either old woman, young girl, very nondescript person, and starts talking to her. And this girl, Pash, young woman, turns and stabs and kills Satala. So Pash is an interesting one. She's one of the servants of Shamal, or is it Shamael? The high priestess of Vashaik in Gdanispan. She had a very troubled childhood as an orphan growing up, being a servant, but Shamal has sort of taken her in and is looking after her. And so her loyalties are strictly to Shamal, not to the cult, not to the other priests and the individuals and the inquisitors and the cultists, strictly to Shamal. Why does she turn and kill Satala? I don't actually know. She seems to have this weird thing where she's trying to keep balance. And so because of a lot of Vashaik assassins have been killed by Satala, she has to kill Satala to sort of keep things even, sort of keep the status quo, I guess. Now, she's not doing this on behalf of Shamal. It turns out Shamal the whole time thought that Pash was just sort of a spy, didn't realize that she was this like crazy good assassin. Speaking of Shamal, she is the high priestess, but she does not sort of follow the rulings and the sort of ideology of the rest of the people in the cult. So a lot of the people in the cult, especially the higher-ups, just want to see 7 cities free of Malazan rule. And a lot of this book deals with what does that mean, this freedom. They're freedom fighters, they're fighting for a freedom, but what freedom to do what? Freedom to oppress others, freedom to not have to obey laws, freedom to sort of do wrong, basically. There are various other high priests, individuals, inquisitors that are only sort of in the cult for secular power. They just want more power, more money, more wealth. And yeah, they want to get rid of the Malazans, the Malazan oppressors, so that they themselves can be the oppressors. And yeah, that's a huge theme of this book, is that sure, the Malazan Empire is a colonial empire that is imposing its rule of law and its taxes and whatnot on 7 cities, but without them, there would just be another group doing the same thing. And at least the Malazan Empire also seems to be doing good things, like building roads and keeping the peace and allowing freedom of religion and whatnot. So I don't think Stephen Erikson's a sort of a colonialist apologist or like a big fan of empire, but in this world, the Malazan Empire is sort of kind of the best you can get. I mean, of course, it still has problems, but maybe it's the lesser of two evils. It still has the negatives of a colonial empire, but it also has a lot of benefits that if the empire wasn't there, then those who would have the freedom to be the new oppressors would not be granting those sort of benefits that the Empire does. Anyways, Chapter 2 also sort of introduces this really interesting relationship between Hadelin, this bodyguard of the adjunct, and the adjunct himself. So these two are kind of in love, but it's a very weird sort of relationship. And to me, like, these first few chapters felt so real. There's tiny little details and things didn't sort of go smoothly or how you would expect. It felt like it just felt real. The writing felt so, I keep saying real over and over again. So Inkaras is in love with his bodyguard, Hadelin. Hadelin is in love with his adjunct, which is the right hand of the Emperor, Inkaras. But Hadelin's starting to think, like, having this relationship, I'm sort of compromising his safety and his security. I need to cut this off. And so Hadelin, he has this weird thing where he says something like, when the tide is high, I really like men, but when the tide is low, I like women. I've never heard of such a thing, but sure, why not? And so he sort of says to Inkaras, like, look, I'm not really into men right now. I'm kind of looking for a woman, so I'm going to go out and find some like female prostitutes, which he does. And he's doing this to distance himself from the adjunct because he wants to protect the adjunct, and he feels like their business relationship is becoming way too personal and it's going to get them both in trouble. The adjunct doesn't know that aspect of it and thinks that, oh, Hadelin, he's just using me. He's no good. I got to distance myself from him. I got to get rid of him. Got to fire him. And he feels a real strong jealousy because of Hadelin going out and sleeping with other people, and it felt very real when, like, it felt like this could be a real thing that would happen between real people and not something you sort of see in a story. Like it was a very sort of complex relationship, and I'm not explaining it fully. You have to read the book to get it. But I really liked that dynamic. And of course, it was Hadelin, the bodyguard of the adjunct, who's going off into the streets to find prostitutes, that sets off this sort of assassin battle on the rooftops, because the Talon are trying to protect him, and the Vash'ik cultists are trying to kill him. Chapter 3, we get introduced to the Marines. So the entire Legion, the regulars, have been taken away from Gdanisban and the rest of the cities and 7 cities. Ostensibly, there's going to be some sort of a change in, not leadership, but a change in the way that 7 cities is run. It's no longer going to be like an occupied force with an occupying army, but it's now going to be run by sort of a constabulary of Malazan police officers, sort of to look after it as a province of the Empire. But in reality, the Legion's really going east because that is where the city that Vash'ik lives in, the sort of the actual holy city, the first city of Vash'ik, of the rebellion is. And so the Legion's going east to be close to that should they be needed. So all we have left is a handful of Marines that are spread throughout the various cities, but centered in Gdanisban, where the High Fist is. We meet Dunsparrow, Captain Dunsparrow, of course, his Whiskey Jack's sister. We've seen her a few times before. She was, I don't think she was ever with the Malazans. She had been with Leoman of the Flails at one point, so she had been sort of part of the rebellion, I believe. It's been a while since I read those books. We don't see much of her. She and her squad go off to Ygatan, because in this book it's sort of hinted at, it's not talked much about, but the cult of Shaik and the Apocalypse is sort of not split in two, but there's 2 main parts to it. There's sort of the traditional worshippers of the goddess Vash'ik, and then there are the sort of cultists who worship Leoman of the Flails and have this huge thing about fire, because of course that's Ygatan. That's where Leoman burned a whole bunch of people to death, burned a whole city down. It's a chapter that's like 200 pages in the Bone Hunters. It's so good. But he sort of created that sort of created his own cult around that. So they're going off to deal with that, which it wouldn't surprise me if the next book is about dealing with that aspect of the apocalypse. Anyways, and the other Marines are sort of sticking close, trying to deal with this uprising that they think is going to start in Gdanisban. A few of them are also dealing with the rising water levels, because remember that Shadow Throne got Mael to sort of have the water levels in the Underquarter rise. And Mael says, like, it's from the Rariku. So the Rariku Sea has come back, and now that water through underground currents is naturally filling up this Underquarter. But of course, Mael's also involved, and there's like a question about, does Mael actually control the sea, or does he just say that he does, or is this just a natural phenomenon that would happen without him? And it's very funny. Chapter 4, we have a couple of the Marines, some sappers, actually go into the Underquarter, ostensibly to sort of see if they can shore it up or stop the water levels from rising, do engineering things. But when they get down there, they find a very lawless place run by numerous gangs and extortions and thugs and whatnot, and they decide, hey, this is how Kellanvid and Dancers founded the Empire, is by taking down these gangs and sort of creating their own gang, but with better rules and ethics and morals, and one thing led to another, and they had an empire. Let's do the same thing down here. We can be Kellanvid and Dancer and create our own little empire down here that will last for like a month. And so they plan out sort of the rise and fall of empire in the space of 4 weeks, which I'm going to read here, how they see it happening. We build an empire that lasts, a month. Think of it. The usual sudden rise, explosive you might say, sweeping all else from its path. Sudden cultural flowering, wealth abounding. Then, in the 2nd week, the consolidation, followed by the first cracks in the foundation. But it's all still good enough to ignore the warning signs. Week 3, said Pulcrude, the beginning of fractionalization. Regional disputes, local block leaders with swelled heads thinking they could do better if they were in charge. Greed arrives, corruption, and the gathering close of muscle for protection, and then enforcement, and then threats, and finally violence. It all explodes. Volkrud nodded. Civil war, anarchy, chaos, blood in the streets. That's week 4. Week 4. End of empire. Everything in ruins, knowledge lost. The survivors forgot how to light cook fires, start eating everything raw, sickness, plague, and so on. So I think that's really funny that you can sort of sum up the different eras of an empire in 4 weeks. We also get another mention of Hasten Thenu, who's now a corporal, not corporal, in the Moraines. And I'm thinking, oh, this is the Elder God undercover, when it's actually just Quick Ben doing whatever Quick Ben's doing to help the Empire, I guess. I don't know what his I don't think we know what his plans are yet. And I think it's the same reason Shadow Throne's involved, is there's more at play here. And it has something to do with Karsa and something to do with godhood and divinity and worship. And we'll get to it later, but Karsa's sort of philosophy is breaking of chains and freedom from oppression, and that means freedom from gods as well. So it might be that in this series we have not just a shakeup of the Pantheon, but a complete destruction of the Pantheon by Karsa, and that's why Quick Ben and Shadow Throne and Cotillion are involved, because naturally they want to sort of, if not maintain status quo, then come out on top. But that is just pure speculation on my part. It's also revealed that this Vashaik, this sort of vessel that tains the goddess, is actually Felisin Younger, who last we saw, which I totally forgot about this thread, but last we saw she had been taken to this city where she's at now and set up as the new Shaik reborn again. So this whole time she has, these past 10 years, she has been in place. And there are vague references to sort of the knowledge that throughout this whole book, and even the last book as well, that people know that Tavor killed her sister Felisin, which I did not like. I like the fact that Lestara, Yil, and Pearl were the only ones that knew, and they did not tell anyone, because like that's just horrible to Tavor to find out that she killed her sister after everything she went through and everything she did. Like, I want that to be a secret that never ever gets out, but it feels like it either is out or it's going to get out, and I don't want Tavor to have to go through that. Like, after that scene in the Crippled God at the very end, when she says to Ganos that I lost her, Ganos, that everything she did, and that's all she could hold on to, was she lost her sister. So finding out that she actually killed her sister, I hope that doesn't happen, but I feel like it's going to, especially with Vashaik being known as Felisin Younger, and everyone knowing that, oh, Felisin, hey, that's the name of Tavor's younger sister. Anyways, chapter 5, we see Felisin Younger, Vashaik, who has been living a life of absolute indulgence in every hedonistic pleasure imaginable, so that her body is now a extremely obese, immobile, unconscious mass of flesh. And everyone in the cult's kind of okay with that, because if the goddess is sort of not dictating the rules, then they can do whatever they want, and that's the case. So there's an inquisitor who's sort of the one running the actual show, and of course he's just doing it for power. He's an evil man. But in this chapter, the sort of spirit of Felisin Younger / Shaik is floating around and seeing different things and witnessing what's going on in her cult. And then her body starts to recover, and it starts to magically heal and lose a lot of its weight, and eventually she comes to, and actually comes to consciousness, which no one in the cult expected. They all expected her to die, and then they just get another Shaik and continue on. But she comes to, she kills the Inquisitor, and she sort of reasserts her control over the cult. And she promotes this librarian, Bornu Blatt, who is a very agnostic person. He does not believe in the cult at all. Like, he can't deny that the goddess exists, because he's literally talking to her, but he does not believe in giving his faith and giving his belief and his worship to another being. He gets promoted to the new Inquisitor, and she sends him out to call a synod, call all the members of the faith to come together, and they can sort of hash out their differences, deal with all the corruption in the cult, and sort of fix things. And I do just want to read a passage where Bornu Blatt expresses his, I use the word agnosticism. He says, "I do not reject the existence of immortals, of gods, spirits, ghosts, and the like. It would be presumptuous of me to assert that the universe is defined by the limits of my perception, and worse, my interpretation of said perception. The blind man does not see the flames, yet they will burn him nonetheless. And are we mortals not mostly blind?" I love that short paragraph, that couple lines, where it sort of states how sort of presumptuous someone can be to call themselves an atheist and to be absolutely sure that there is no supernatural. There is nothing more than the existence that we perceive. Anyway, so that's Bornu Blatt, really cool guy. So Bornu Blatt, he's a really ugly guy. It's said over and over again about how his body is just so repulsive, and so he's always kept himself away from other people and never really had any sort of relationships, romantic or interpersonal or any type, because he's always seen that as sort of a mercy to sort of keep himself away from people because he's so repulsive physically. But he's really a great guy, and he has this sort of this assistant in the library, Salabi, who is this beautiful woman that he had managed to protect from someone who wanted to abuse her. And it turns out that she is madly in love with him, and of course he's been in love with her forever, but he's never ever shown a hint of it, because again, he wants to sort of, as a mercy, to protect her from himself, not from himself, from his sort of having to deal with his repulsiveness. So he sets out on this journey across 7 cities to gather all of the faithful and all of the high priestesses and priests and whatnot, deal with the topic of their religion. And Vashaik also says that we are sort of divided. There are sort of the cultists of Leoman of the Flails. She said we need Leoman of the Flails to be part of this synod in order to come together and to bring everyone together. And we're not sure if Leoman has ascended, if he is a god now, or if he's even alive. She's pretty sure he's alive. By the way, the last time we seen him, I think it was Orb Scepter Throne. He had been just chilling on the shores of creation, and Kiska had come back. They've sort of had a weird relationship. Kiska had left with, what was his name? Tren, the new Taishren that she had finally found. But then she had come back for Leoman of the Flails. And do they continue their relationship, or does he sort of go off on his own? Does he ascend to godhood? Who knows? We don't know that. But that's the last we've seen of him. He's just been a normal human, normal morsel dude. So chapter 6, we have Bornu Blatt, now Inquisitor, going out and visiting various villages and towns in 7 cities. He's followed by this guy Gilakas, who is ostensibly his bodyguard, but is revealed that he is actually a claw and is there to sort of kill the Inquisitor should he start to spark this rebellion. But as they travel, Gilakas and Bornu Blatt come to sort of an understanding that Bornu Blatt does not want, and Vashaik does not want, a rebellion, and Bornu Blatt has been chosen specifically because he's the sort of person that he's not a religious fanatic. He's not going to start a rebellion. And so Gilakas and him they get along. But they come to this town, and just as they're about to enter, these 2 people, an older person and a younger person, jump out and attack them, and they kill these 2 people. Or they get down to the village, and the people at the village mention, hey, did you come across the bandit on your way here? And they're like, the bandit? We were attacked by 2 people, and it's sort of revealed that these 2 people that attacked them were just a father and son from the village who had gone out to catch this bandit that had escaped, and then had mistakenly attacked Bornu Blatt and Gilakas, getting themselves killed. So they were just an innocent father-son. And to make it even more complex, like I said, this sort of section of the book feels very real. It's not just one thing leads to another. It's so many different things and butterfly effects and consequences that have other consequences that lead to one thing to another. Like, it amazes me how he's able to keep track of all this and plan this out in his brain. But this father and son had gone out chasing a fugitive, this supposed bandit, that is actually this child that had been taken by these nameless ones, a blood sacrifice to consecrate their temple. So it was actually an innocent boy, but the nameless ones claimed when the boy escaped that he was actually a bandit, a fugitive. And so this father and son from the village, going out to catch this bandit, who is really an innocent boy, stumble across the Inquisitor and his Malazan claw bodyguard and get killed. So just a series of tragic events and misunderstandings. And this is just one tiny little scene, but it really stood out to me, just the complexity and the tragedy and the realness of the whole thing. So yes, the nameless ones. So they're the cult that sort of keeps Ikariam under control, keeps Ikariam's rage under control, or tries to. I don't think they worship Ikariam, but anyways, I don't really remember much about them. There is a temple in this village that they are trying to consecrate to Ikariam. It is supposedly a Nameless One temple. It's got carvings of Ikariam and stuff on it. Bornu Blatt reveals that it's actually built on the foundation of a temple to Disablakis, the first emperor, so it's not actually a nameless one. So if you sort of spill blood there, then you're just helping out Blackast, and we don't want to bring him back, and the Daragoth specifically. So Bornu Blatt sits down and debates with these nameless ones and reveals that they're sort of all charlatans, and just like the other members of other faiths, they're just doing this for secular reasons of power. And yeah, so the nameless ones all break up and all flee, except for two, this woman Gracer and this man Stalt, who's madly in love with Gracer. Gracer does not reciprocate at all, but those two decide to follow Gilakas and Bornu Blatt on their journey. Why? Just because they've got nowhere else to go. And they recognize Gilakas as a Mesla, a Malazan, and they sort of question, like, why are you following, like, you, Inquisitor Vashik, why are you followed by this Mesla, this Malazan? And Bornu Blatt has the wonderful rebuttal of, well, technically this is the Malazan Empire, so we're all Malazans. And they're like, oh, you know what I mean. But yeah, they've been sort of, 7 cities have been occupied for a generation now, so yeah, they are all Malazans. And this has come up a time and again in Ginnabakis as well, which is part of the Malazan Empire, so if you live there, you're technically a Malazan, much like the people of Quantali are Malazans, even though they're not technically from Malaz, which is a tiny island off the coast. And so the boy who was to be a sacrifice is sort of named Mute because he's mute, and they take him along with them as well. Now, Mute is a very interesting character. He appears and then is killed within a very, very short time. And the reason for him existing in the story, I don't fully understand. It felt like he was going to be a big plot point, but then he was dealt with so quickly that I'm not really sure why he exists. So the boy himself is actually a weird sort of simulacrum or homunculus or a being that has been created accidentally. And he references his father, and he's trying to find his father, and it's sort of revealed that his father is Akarium. And then it's later revealed, or further revealed, that, well, Akarium's not really his father, he sort of is a part of Akarium. And so Akarium, which, there was the whole thing about him being a literal ghost in the Kachanchamal machine, back in Dust of Dreams or the Crippled God, but he sort of reincorporated and became flesh once more. I thought in the last we saw of him, he was standing over the corpse of Mappo and he didn't recognize him. So I thought Akarium sort of still exists, although Akarium did create these new warrens, and there's lots of talk in this book about how the warrens are totally separate and distinct things that are not connected, unlike Cruel's warrens, which are based in Starbald Demelaine and each have a sort of an elate that controls them to some degree, and so there's order there, but Akarium's are not. And so it's kind of revealed through this boy Mute that Akarium himself has been split up into multiple different separate beings, one of them being this Mute that is the rage of Akarium incarnate. So literally just his rage, which I would say is the most dangerous part of him. He's mute because he sort of exists, his soul or his consciousness exists in sort of a different pocket warren outside of his body, and his body just sort of is almost an automaton. But there are times when he can go into the body and control it, and usually when he does that, it's to sort of unleash his rage and commit vast mass murder. And this boy does so out of a sense of sort of justice, a very Forcruelan sense of justice. And that added with the sort of the keening and the voice, the sound that this boy makes when he is murdering and killing and stripping flesh from bone, feels very, very Forcruel assail. Now, I took that to be because Akarium, being a half-blood Jag, he's the son of Gothos, a Jagat, and his mother, which we never really found out who his mother was. I think it has to be Kilimandaros, because of the Forcruel assail aspect. Now, I think Kilimandaros is also, she's the progenitor of the Forcruel assail, but also the Thelakai, I believe. Because remember, back in the Reaper's Gale, Karsa, when he sees Akarium, he mentions that there must be some Tolbakai blood in his ancestry. Anyways, this boy Mute seems very Forcruel assail. And so there's one scene that I'll get to, but I want to finish up Mute's story. And this crew, they enter a village, and they're sort of being pursued by these bandits, and they know it's coming, so they all go into the tavern and they're getting prepared. And then Mute, who's outside, texts that they're coming, and his rage and his sense of injustice is awakened, and he decimates all of the bandits and destroys the entire town, flattens the entire town, very Ikariam style. And he's not yet done. He detects a presence underneath this temple. He blasts his way underneath this temple and comes across an Azathanai, so an elder goddess. We don't know the name of this elder goddess, and I'm not going to speculate on who it could be. I think it's just someone that we don't know. And Mute is still in his rage mode, so he's like, I'm going to kill you. And she says that I'm Azathanai, I cannot die. And it's said again and again throughout this book that the Azathanai cannot die. They do not have the ability to die. Which, I mean, tell that to Kilmandaros and Setual Lath and Olar Ethel. Like, we've seen some die, unless they haven't actually died. But that's a sort of a weird incongruity, or at least it seems to be one. And so this Azathanai reveals all this information that I just said about Mute being part of Ikariam, and sort of talks about the hubris of Ikariam. How does he think he could use his blood to create these new warrens? Cruel could do so because he was immortal Azathanai, and he has this endless flow of blood. Ikariam does not, and so maybe that's why there's these problems with these runts, these new warrens. And she says something like, Ikariam is now disparate, and if all of those pieces were to come together without Mute, his sort of rage and his sense of justice, then having an Ikariam devoid of rage and devoid of sort of an internal moral compass would be even more deadly. So she says she's going to do the world a favor and just reaches out and kills Mute. Just straight up kills him. So that's the end of Mute. And again, more Azathanai. So, which, like I said, it feels like a very Carcanus book with all of these Azathanai being referred to as Azathanai and not as elder gods. Anyways, but before the crew gets to this village, they come across a cave. Speaking of Azath, cave turns out to be an Azath house. So the Azath House are the buildings that are sort of created or grow throughout the world whenever there is a need for balance. Whenever there is life and some of that life becomes too powerful, the Azath Houses will rise up to sort of contain that super powerful beings and maintain a balance. And they take different forms. If it's in a city, then the Azath House will look like a building in a city. If, like we saw in Nordlife Forsaken, it was like a Jekt Azath house, so it looked like just a pile of rocks or something that some wolves would hang out in. In this case, it's a cave. There's a mention that even sort of in pre-Cambrian times, when things lived in the ocean, there would be an Azath house that would arise in the ocean. Anyway, so they're at this Azath cave. And Bornu Blatt, he's curious. His goddess is also curious inside of him, and he goes in to check it out. Inside are 3 passageways. One is blocked off by a bunch of rubble, and on top of that rubble sits a skull. It's a Talanamas who's been sitting there forever. The Talanamas reveals that he had been tracking down a Jagut who was holed up in this cave, and he was trying to kill her, but she managed to defeat him and sort of stuck his skull there to look out for all eternity. But she's still in the cave somewhere. The other passage leads to the Azath House itself, and the Talanamas is trying to get him, hey, go down that path, and then the Azath House will suck you in, and then I won't have to deal with you again. And then the third path is where the Jagut is, so that's where Bornu Blatt goes down. He goes down that path, and he finds the desiccated corpse of this Jagut. But he does sort of feel a bit of a chill in the air, so Amtos Falak and the spirit of the Jagut are still sort of around. Gracer, the woman who's following them, or the woman who's with the crew, goes in behind him, sees the Jagut, notices a flint blade in the Jagut's body and pulls it out. And Bornu Blatt's like, what are you doing? How can you loot the corpse of a Jagut? Like, her spirit's still lingering here. And she's like, hey, she doesn't need this dagger. And once the dagger's pulled out, the Jagut starts to regenerate. Her spirit goes back into her body and she comes back to life. And she stands up and she's like, thank you for pulling that dagger out. It's been millennia and no one wouldn't pull that dagger out. And she storms off. And she makes a comment about how Azath houses cannot hold Jagut. We only stay willingly or something, which at first I'm like, this has huge implications for Gardens of the Moon when Raist was ensconced inside of an Azath house, and it must have been voluntary and he must have decided to do so. But I think she was just sort of saying that because, I mean, she had been stuck there for millennia. She wasn't voluntarily there. And on her way out, she sort of slaps the Talanamas skull across the room and sort of looks at the scenery and is like, wow, things have changed, and storms off. Bornu Blatt puts the skull back in place and then they leave. And so that sort of felt like the author's way of just sort of sticking in a Jagut and a Talanamas. Like, hey, these guys are still around, and it's kind of cool to see them again. but that was sort of their only. I guess they did have other purpose, sort of a bigger purpose. The Talanamas specifically, they did mention that the Talanamas Jagat war is over, and that Amtos and Falak has been surrendered, and that all the events that we saw at the end of Assail by Esselmont. But the other sort of big reason they're at this cave is there's some paintings on the cave wall, and Bornu Blatt comes across one painting, this very realistic portrait of an Emas woman, very beautiful woman, and it looks so realistic and so lifelike that the artist managed to capture the essence of this woman in this stone. And that's when we get the explanation that, if you recall, that the whirlwind goddess, Shaik, the apocalypse, that all started from, if you can believe it or not, Onrak. So Onrak, the Emas that we know and love, he had been married to this woman, or in love with this woman, been with this woman, but he then fell in love with Kilava. Again, you should know this from the Book of the Fallen. And so he painted a portrait of Kilava on at this wall, which is sort of a cultural taboo to paint anyone, because it's sort of stealing their life force or their soul or their being and preserving it in stone. It's a big no-no. You do not do that. And what's worse is that Onrak painted the wrong woman. He painted not his wife, but this other woman that he's been in love with. And so his wife, in rage and absolute fury, eventually becomes this goddess Shaik, the whirlwind, a goddess that wants to destroy the world in an apocalypse, and sort of embodies all of the rage of all the women and people and just all the unfairness in life and everything built up over the millennia. That's Shaik. So that is why Vashaik, through Bornu Blatt, was curious and wanted to see this and sort of understand that what started out as an Emas that had been sort of spurned by her husband has created this huge thing. There's also in chapter 7 a scene with Vashaik and the new librarian Salabi talking about Bidithal and Felasin Younger's sort of earlier childhood and the pain and rage that Felasin Younger has experienced as a child, being part of this sort of continuity of rage and the unfairness of life and things that have upset people and whatnot. And there's talk of using love as a weapon, and whether love is a weapon or not. Salabi doesn't think that it is, but Vashaik does think that it is. Chapter 8's a really cool one. So chapter 8's when I'm really starting to think this is very Fall of Light. This is very Carcanus. So we have Satala, the Talon assassin who had been killed by Pash. She awakens in this forest. She's like, what the heck? I died. I'm so mad. I'm gonna get that little girl. And then she notices this great hulking being ensconced and ensnared by a whole bunch of roots or vines. I guess roots, not vines. And they get chatting. Turns out he doesn't remember who he is, but he's a Thelakai / Tobakai, but not a Thelaman or a Tarthano or a Fen, because the Tarthano, the Thelaman Tarthano were these scumbag pirates, and he was a Thelakai. And anyways, there's lots of references to how all of these names are from like the same sort of people. It's kind of funny. But he's being held there because they're in like sort of an upside down world where these roots that are holding him are the roots of the yard of an Azath. So like this tree's upside down, but it's not really upside down. They're the ones upside down, and he's stuck in these roots. And if you read Fall of Light or remember it, now I read it a few years ago. I've only read it the one time. I'm waiting for a Walk in Shadow release date, and then I'll read them again. This guy is Canon Thrall, or Canon Thrall, who he had been like Ardada's lover or something, and Starvold Demelaine was like leaking or something, and they needed a soul to seal it. And Skillindro, which we're going to talk about him, he was going to do it. But then Canon Thrall, something happened to him. He was poisoned or something. He was dying slowly, and so he volunteered to have his soul enmeshed in Starvold Demelaine. So that he did that, and then in this chapter he talks about how he remembers awakening, falling through the sky, and then landing, and the people grabbing him and throwing him in an Azath house. So I can't remember exactly, but in the Book of the Fallen there was something with Starvold Demelaine, Reaper's Gale era leaking, and the refugium with the Emas and whatever. So I'm assuming around that point he got kicked out of the rent, crashed down on some city, and all the people there are like, what the heck is this giant doing here? Let's toss him into the Azath house yard, which they did, and he gets sort of eaten. And because of the timelessness of the Azath, he manages to heal, and now he's totally fine, except he's, stuck in a Zath yard. So Satala's like, cool, I'll help you get out. So they cut a whole bunch of the roots, and he manages to escape. He decides to call himself the Grey Shore because he doesn't remember his name, and the Grey Shore sounds amazing, so why wouldn't he call himself that? And him and Satala head off. It feels very sort of Toblakai and Samardev, Karsa Orlong and Samardev, sort of, although he's not like a Karsa character. He's a very different sort of he's a really cool guy. He's very vocal and loud and adventure, let us go on a great adventure, you and I. And so they set off. I hope we see more of them because they show up again at another point and don't really do much, and then sort of disappear again. So I hope we do see this wacky duo again. So yeah, Satala's dead, but for whatever reason, she hasn't actually passed over to the realm of the dead. I was going to say Hood's realm, but Hood's dead, baby. So the Grey Limper, Iskar Jarak himself, and his Soldiers of Death, they do not really let people get away with coming back to life. They are very strict on that, but it's revealed that she has actually come to life because her body, which Arenfall had put in this pocket warren that he's created, which is a timeless pocket warren, so their time does not pass while things are in there. Similar to in a Zath house, where we've had a couple characters who have been close to dying. Char, Ralak Nom, Kalam. I think all of three of them have been put inside of Zath houses when they were near death, and it prevents them from dying. So her body has been in there, so it hasn't been rotting. And Arenfall notices that someone had broken and stolen her body. And turns out that this someone is Skilindro. So the Azathanai from Fall of Light, who's another really cool character, who he has the aspect of the Kachin Jamal, like a flying Kachin Jamal, a Shigal assassin, I believe. And he's sort of the progenitor of the Kachin Jamal, I think, or at least has spent a lot of time with them because he was very fascinated with them and their crazy logic and whatnot. And he had taken Satala's body, put her soul back into it, and put her in that place to free Canon Thrall. Because remember, Canon Thrall agreed to sacrifice himself on behalf of Skilindro, so Skilindro sort of feels he owes this guy. So Arenfall has a chat with him about this whole thing and then leaves. Skilindro then sees this 6-armed stone gray character charging at him, shooting arrows at him. And of course we immediately recognize that as the character from The God Is Not Willing, who was this sort of stone statue that had been chained by mortals, and Damask, the hunter, released it, and then it went off and killed a whole bunch of Kachin Jamal and decimated Kachin Jamal. And so of course seeing Skilindro, it thinks that it's a Kachin Jamal and starts shooting at it. And then Skilindro's like, whoa, Spingal, what are you doing, buddy? And then Spingal sort of stops and is like, oh yeah, I sort of forgot who I was. And Spingal is a character, sometimes lord, sometimes lady of the hunt, that we saw in Fall of Light. So I guess this is the reveal that character from The God Is Not Willing had been Spingal. I don't think we knew that, or at least I certainly didn't until this book. And they have a very, very funny chat, and they mention about Azathanai and about how the Jagat are separate from the Azathanai, and there's sort of a weird thing of chicken and egg, who came first, and really cool lore stuff that I'm really into. Spingal talks about how they wanted to be worshipped, but they didn't want to have that reciprocal relationship and do stuff for their worshippers, and so they turn themselves to a statue, and then people come and worship them, but because they're just a statue, they don't have to do anything in return. And then how the people then chained the statue to the ground, and so they were stuck, and it's a whole very, very funny thing about mortals and gods and their relationships. Chapter 9, we have Bornu Blatt and company again. They enter another village, and again, this time there's a mercenary company there that's sort of working for some of the people that the sort of bad guys in the Vashaik cult are sort of paying to cause mischief and foment rebellion. And Bornu Blatt, his two guys, Stultan Gracer and Gilakas, they're like, we're going to get killed, we need some help. So Bornu Blatt calls in help from his goddess. So Vashaik contacts Shamal, the high priestess in Gdanisban, who then in turn contacts the high fist, Arenfall, and says, hey, we've got some people heading this way. They're under attack by mercenaries. These mercenaries are not great people. They have a whole bunch of children held hostage, and they're doing horrible things with these children. You need to help out. And so Arenfall's like, yeah, of course, that's what we do. It's our job. We're the military. If there's sort of something to deal with, we will deal with it. And so he sends a squad, which the squads are weird. So it's a corporal, a sergeant, and then the squad members, some heavies, some sappers, healer, etc. But it's also a captain and a lieutenant. So I always thought that the captain and then the captain's assistant was the lieutenant. They sort of looked after a number of different sergeants, who then had their assistant, the corporal, and then each sergeant corporal had their squad. But in this, it seems the squads are made up of sort of the regular dudes, the corporal and sergeant, but then also the captain and the lieutenant. Like, it feels like a lot of redundancy that we have the corporal, the people who report to the corporal, who reports to the sergeant, who reports to the lieutenant, who reports to the captain. And anyways, so he decides to send a squad of Marines, but then he's also going to go himself, which is kind of crazy that the High Fist is going to go himself. But I guess if a goddess is asking you, then you're like, well, yeah, I'm gonna do my best. And then even weirder than that, the adjunct, who seems to be really getting along with Arenfall and is actually kind of falling for Arenfall, even though he knows nothing's ever going to happen there, he's going to go with him as well. And he has to leave his Otadral sword behind, but he's also still a great swordman with a mundane sword, and so they set off through a warren created by Vashaik to get them right there. And now this warren's very interesting. It immediately gave me like First World War vibes, or even Second World War vibes, where they talk about giant war machines and these sort of birds that don't flap, and land that's sort of like, I'm thinking like no man's land, like a destroyed land. I don't think that's what the author was going for, but and they mentioned that the faces of the soldiers are like featureless obsidian black masks or something, or masks that are black and obsidian like. And I pictured like black gas masks. Vashaik herself is possessing this sort of dead creature / machine, which also sort of gave me weird like 40k vibes with like this giant hulking alien machine thing. Anyways, really cool. They pass through this warren and pop out the other side, and the Marines get to work and they take out these mercenaries. One of the mercenaries is this mage, who they find out has not really been doing sort of the evil things that everyone else has been doing, and she's really powerful and useful. So they try to recruit her to make her to bring her into the Marines. So they managed to capture her. They also capture the captain, but the sort of the captain of the mercenary company. But because he's complicit in all these horrible acts, they tie him up and leave him to the villagers, whose children he has been, assaulting. And so the villagers tear him to pieces. Hopefully that's all happens off screen. So whatever horrible punishment you want to imagine for someone like that, you can imagine that's what happened. But unfortunately, the adjunct dies in this fight because he's uses an Otadral sword, and he's so inebriated with Otadral, he cannot be healed by mundane, or not mundane means he cannot be healed by anything other than high denewal, which of course they don't have. This has always been an issue with adjuncts, Tavor, even Lorne, I think, and so the adjunct dies. Now, of course, how does this look to Hadelin and the Claw? That the adjunct goes off alone with the High Fist, who he's supposed to assassinate at some point, and the adjunct just happens to die while the High Fist gets out scot-free. So this will have implications later on, this unfortunate death of this adjunct. Chapter 10, not much happens. Hadelin, the bodyguard, is then promoted to adjunct, which is kind of weird that even though he was the adjunct's bodyguard, he's now promoted to adjunct, although he has an Otadral sword, so he's sort of already set up. They haven't heard word from Malakrel to sort of get the go-ahead to promote this guy to adjunct, but they do so anyways, just because I guess they need an adjunct. And of course, Hadelin's thinking, Inkra Solit, this man that I've loved, he was murdered by Arenfall. So he's starting to make plans of how he's going to deal with Arenfall, which was sort of the plan all along. It's not that Hadelin's a bad guy. That's sort of what he was meant to do. We also get a bit of these sappers down in the Underquarter, who it's revealed that a couple of these other people that are in the Underquarter are also down there doing the same thing that these two crazy sappers have gone down to do, and they're worried about getting their cover blown and whatever. They do sort of consolidate power under this one sort of thug named Sug, who's actually not that bad of a guy, I guess, lesser of many evils. But then Sug gets sucked into an Azath house, and it turns out there's an Azath house in the Underquarter, the Underhouse as they call it. So that's important information. Chapter 11, we go back with Bornu Blatt and company, entering yet another village, or this one's a town a bit bigger, and he sees this Toblakai, this half-blood Fen who he talks to, who had been a slave, much like Karsa, but had a much better life. He was slave to a master that treated him well. I mean, he's still a slave, and this guy has built a temple to Karsa Orlong, and they talk about the Karsi cult and how Karsa is rejecting his divinity because religion is just another form of oppression, and Karsa is all about breaking chains. And they describe these chains with like sort of barbs and stuff in the links and caltrops and whatnot. There's very like spiky chains decorating this temple, which are important later on in this chapter. And so Bornu Blatt and him, they have this great conversation about religion and stuff. And like I said, big theme of this book is nature of religion and cults and faith. Meanwhile, some problems start to occur when there is a procession of the Crow cult, so Cultain's cult, which I wish we would have heard more about, is attacked by members of the Vashaik cult who start killing people. And Gracer sees this one boy who's about to be killed or has been injured, and she rushes in to try and save this boy, but she herself gets killed in the process. A troop of Malazans run up, the Malazan, the town guard, who turn out to be regular Legion infantry who have been stationed there for a while. So they mean business, and they sort of scatter the Vashaik cultists who rush back to their temple to hide. And Vashaik herself possesses the corpse of Gracer and uses that as to sort of be embodied but still be protected because she can't be killed. She's possessing a corpse to manifest and deal with these cultists. So the Malazans are like, hey, we're going to go kill all of these cultists in that temple because of what they did. Don't get in our way. And then Vashaik's like, no, let me deal with it. And the Malazans are like, we are here to put down a rebellion. You're going to start a rebellion. And there's a whole thing. And while they're arguing about who's going to deal with the cultists, turns out Karsa gets involved via this thing that the Karsi priest calls the Tobelkai's Wake. So this priest, this high priest of the Karsi cult, who the high priests are called the first witness in this cult. Really cool. The chains that have been around the temple sort of animate and rush down through the street and get to the temple of Vashaik and destroy it, eviscerate everyone inside it, destroy every brick, just level this building. And then this sort of chains become quiescent and calm back down again. And so now there's this new weapon of Karsa Orlong, the Tobelkai's Wake, which I'm sure we'll see more of later on. Chapter 12, things start to get intense. We get a lot of stuff happening. So chapter 12 starts with Paucity, this Forkrul Assail guardian of the Underhouse. She's really cool. She's a very different sort of Forkrul Assail than any that we've seen. She mentions that she's never really interested in justice, more in fairness. So she was not a very good Forkrul Assail. Her name's Paucity, which I think is also hilarious. And she's writing a book, or she's trying to write a book. Anyways, I won't go into detail. It's really funny and I like her. She detects a presence entering the Azath house. Remember that the Azath house are all connected and they have this weird tile room that people can sort of use these tiles to transport through. Anyway, she goes into the tile room and Mael pops out and she's like, oh, you're not the one I'm waiting for. Someone else is coming, but I guess you're supposed to be here to witness it. And Mael complains about Shadow Throne manipulating him and getting him to rise the waters in the Underquarter and how he's not going to stop. He's going to keep rising the waters and he's going to flood the entire earth and wipe it clean, have a clean slate. We're going to start over again. Very biblical of him. He mentions how with the Jagout giving up on Omtos Falak and all of the ice melting, that's just more water running into the ocean. He's getting more and more powerful. Yeah, so they have some good banter, those two. And then the people we're actually waiting for arrive. It is, of course, Kanan Thrall and Satala. They pop out of where they had been. There's a mention of fighting a Segula to try and get through the Azath house, or the corridors in between, which, like, we've had Segula, we've had Imas, Forkrul Assail, Jagut. Everyone but Atice are in this book. Mael tells Kanan Thrall, hey, your name's Kanan Thrall. You were sealed up in that Starval Demolane leak 500,000 years ago, which I thought was funny that we get in 500,000 years. And he's like, what? 500,000 years? And Mael says something like, well, yeah, but time's kind of weird because that was before the realms broke apart or something, which these little nuggets of detail and stuff, which maybe it's just Mael being silly saying 500,000 years, but and like the breaking of the realms, but it makes me want to read Carconis more, which maybe this is all just a big advertising scheme for Walking Shadow that's going to come out. Not that he needed it, but yeah, I'm excited for more Carconis. And so Paucity reveals that, yeah, they're in the Underhouse under Gadanis ban, and Satala's like, great, I can go up and kill that little girl Pash that tried to kill me, or that did kill me. She's not a little girl, she's Pash's Pash. So this is when Hadlin makes his move. He has his claw under his control, and they attack Arenfall. So Arenfall manages to escape, but he's got a whole bunch of daggers in him that are poisoned, and so he's dying. So he manages to crawl into his pocket warren of timelessness, much like in the Zathos, and sit there and survive. However, he would not have had not the wonderful Hasten Thenu, apparently Quick Ben, show up and heal him. So he manages to be able to heal him of the poison because the Gidanis band is where Poliel had died. Remember, I think it was Ganos Paran that actually killed her. So because the goddess of death and disease had died there, and it's also mentioned that Poliel and Soliel had been twin gods, much like Opon. They had sort of been two faces of the same thing. So the goddess of healing and the goddess of disease. Anyway, so because Poliel had died there and her divine blood had been spilled out, Gidanis band's like, it's really easy to heal people in Gidanis band. Anyway, he manages to heal Arenfall, and they have a little chat about... This is when the Book of the Fallen gets mentioned, and like an actual physical Book of the Fallen gets mentioned, and Arenfall talks about how he's performing at this inn, or this tavern one time, because he's also a poet and a musician, and how this beautiful woman came up and danced to the song that he was singing, which it was a song about the crippled god that had been written by Fisher. And Hasten Thenu doesn't say this, but he reveals to the audience that that woman was Lostar Yil. And so that's what I'm thinking, what, is this Ruth any good? How does he know Lostar Yil? Which, Lostar Yil, I'm pretty sure she's the one that says she doesn't just dance for everybody. So the fact that she dances for Arenfall and the people of this tavern must be important. Because she's the one who does her shadow dance in the Crippled God. It's such a good scene when she gets up. I can't remember the name of the Blue Rose Cavalry officer that she's been in love with, but actually I think it might have been Dustin Dreams. It was the day of the Naruk when she does her shadow dance and takes out all these Naruk. Whew, I'm getting chills. Anyway, so yeah, I guess that's further evidence that this is Quick Ben. Hasten Thenu also sort of talks about or thinks about this pocket warren of timelessness and all the sort of uses he could have for that, and how armies could use it to sort of store supplies that would never rot, and different ways that sort of time magic could be used. Which brings me back to the prologue when he's using time magic, and that really threw me off when he's talking about, oh wow, we could use this warren, this timeless pocket warren to like manipulate time and stuff. So, but I'm like, the whole time I'm thinking he's like an elder god of time travel, so I'm like, well, you should already know this. But then I'm like, oh, maybe this is before he sort of ascends to godhood as the god of sort of time travel, because of course the prologue takes place after the events of the story. And see, I was really, really confused when this whole time it was just Quick Ben, who maybe he is becoming a god of time travel, I don't know. Anyways, chapter 13, we have Bornu Blatt and crew finally arriving at the gates of Gidanis Ban. There is a squad of Marines there to escort them in, and there is some Shaikh cultists who are guarding the gate, trying to keep them out, or at least to kill the Malazans, and they're kind of weird about the Inquisitor. Vashaik this whole time is still possessing the corpse of Gracer, who is starting to rot. And Stalt, remember Stalt, the other guy who has been madly in love with Gracer, is like in intense pain this whole time, seeing the corpse of the woman he loved be animated by this goddess. In this chapter, she releases Gracer and then inhabits Bornu Blatt. And in inhabiting Bornu Blatt, she detects all the pain, the physical pain that he's endured, and all the everything, and the rage and everything that he's gone through in his life. And that sort of is like a catalyst for igniting her, literally. And she sort of becomes this, I think it's in the next chapter, but she becomes this sort of almost a sun, and the nighttime becomes brilliant in this ball of flame and rage and anger, and sort of the unfairness of life personified in this goddess Vashaik. So meanwhile, the cultists start to make their move and start attacking the Marines. So we've got battles in the streets with the Marines. This is also the time we have the scene of Mael standing sort of near the city, overlooking it, thinking about like the rising waters and how he's going to flood the whole thing. And Hasten Thenu shows up and starts chatting with Mael, and this is when he reveals that Hasten Thenu knows that Mael is not just an elder god, but he's an Azathani, which then sets Mael questioning, who is this Hasten Thenu, this corporal who's not a corporal. And they have a bit of a chat, and Mael agrees to not flood the earth. He will stop. He's not going to set a rainbow up in the sky or anything, but he stops the flooding waters, and he agrees to stick with the plan that Shadow Throne had made with him. And he still doesn't like being manipulated by Shadow Throne, but he agrees that if he were to go down and confront this goddess Vashaik, who is almost fully manifested in this place, that would precipitate a convergence, like a big convergence, and they want to avoid convergence. So Mael is stepping back. Hasten Thenu's like, great, finally. So Vashaik is planning on wiping out all of life on the planet. The rage against the world and life makes her want to destroy both of those things, and she is the apocalyptic personified. And Hasten Thenu then shows up in like the Shadow Realm and manages to capture the spirit of Bornu Blatt, who's been pushed out of his body, create sort of a perfect shadow body for him, like beautiful, functioning, not in pain, and gives him a choice of, you can live like this in the Shadow Realm with your shadow body for forever, or for however long, or you can go back into your old crippled body and return to Salabi. And he reveals that Salabi's been in love with you this whole time. So Bornu Blatt, of course, makes the correct decision and says, yes, I will go back into my body. Hasten Thenu's like, great, that's what I need you to do to deal with this goddess problem. So he says, like, when I give you the signal, when Vashaik is distracted, then go back inside your body. Meanwhile, Shamal, the high priestess of Gdanispan, who I haven't really talked much about her character and her personality. She's a very, very, very funny sort of character where she's like got notes of Tehol, but notes of Isgarl Past, and she sort of makes it out that she's constantly high and drunk and inebriated and a hedonistic high priestess of Vashaik, but she's really actually like a good person and a very clever person. And it turns out that she reveals that while Vashaik had been sort of in her 10 years of inebriated hedonism, she had been sort of leaking divine power that all the other high priests have been gathering and using for their own secular ends to gain power, but Shamal had been holding it in reserve and building up this reservoir of divine power that she finally taps into. So she's super, super powerful, almost as powerful as the goddess. And so Kanan Thrall and Satala show up at the temple to kill Pash, and they do kill a whole bunch of the bad sort of cultists, but Shamal just literally bats them aside, both of them, because she's so powerful, and goes out and confronts Vashaik. And using her power as high priestess and using the connection again between worshipper and worshipped, manages to pull Vashaik out and manifest her in her vulnerable divine form. Bornu Blatt then can go back into his body so that he gets his body back, and Stult, who has had to have witnessed the woman he loves, her bloated corpse, be possessed by this goddess, then goes up and, using that dagger that had killed the Jagot from that Azath cave, stabs and kills Felasin Younger and thus Vashaik. And so the goddess has finally died. I think finally. So Shaik has been reborn again and again and again, but I think she has finally died. And it was really neat, sort of the perspective of Vashaik during this time when she's experiencing all the rage and everything. The author describes it as sort of a childlike rage, because people like Felasin Younger, they did not really have a childhood, so they haven't matured past that sort of rage and anger at the unfairness of life. It's a very teenage feeling of people who are better off than you, or have had a better life than you, or who have more power and success and stuff than you. That sort of bitter rage at the unfairness of, how dare those people get things that I don't get. That's what Shaik has sort of embodied, and yeah, I really like those sections. So backing up a bit, Arenfall, he's sort of back and healed. He has the ability to kill Hadolin. He sees Hadolin and he's like, I could sneak up and kill this guy. But he goes up to him and says, hey Hadolin, I know you just tried to kill me and that all your claw just did, but look, we got to work together. The city's in rebellion. Will you trust me, and can we work together? And he explains that, look, the adjunct died on his own. I didn't have any part of it. The old adjunct and I came to an understanding. I want to come to that understanding with you, and let's work together for the good of the Empire. And they agreed to do so. And so they set out to fight Vashaik. So the plan is to stab her with the Otadral sword, and hopefully that'll kill her. Even though she's a goddess, and does Otadral combat the power of a goddess? Who knows? But unfortunately, because Gilakas, who is a claw, he's back in the city, he takes command of the rest of the claw in the city, and he comes across Hadolin, the adjunct, Arenfall, and he says, like, I'm pretty sure that Arenfall killed the adjunct. Like, I didn't see it, but I think he did. And so Hadolin's like, what? How dare you? I trusted you. And all five of the claw and Hadolin all turn and attack Arenfall at once. and they all drop. The claw are all dead, and the adjunct is wounded and incapacitated. And he's like, "What? How could you stop 5 claw and an adjunct with an Otadriel sword?" And he's like, "Because it was 5 claw against 5 marines, and that's not even a competition or something." It's like there's no doubt in my mind who would win that battle. And then of course the marines in the city sort of come out, and marines against claw, deadly mage assassins against marines, and the marines will win every time. So they've wounded Hadolin. They don't kill him. They actually stitch him up and get him some healing, so he will live. So Vashaik is dead. Sort of the rebellion has been put down, at least half of it. There's still the Leoman of the Flails cult in Yigatan that Dunsparrow has gone after. So Arenfall is sort of a fugitive of the Empire now, because even if he did manage to put down the rebellion, Malak Rel has still sent the adjunct to assassinate him, and the fact that an entire hand of claw has been wiped out, like, he's not going to get away with still being around. And so he's going to, do the old classic fake his death and assume a different name. One of the Marines gives him the sort of accoutrement of a corporal and says, "Hey, come on, join us. We're going to head east with the rest of the Legion. You can just be a corporal, but you're going to need a new name." He's like, "Yeah, I'll come up with a new name." So if in the next book or in a later book we happen to meet this Marine corporal named Grub, then we'll know that I'm right. So that's why I'm like thinking Grub. He's going to change his name back to Grub. Pure speculation. So Shamal, the High Priestess, and Inquisitor Bornu Blatt, they travel by Warren back to Salabi and back to the first city where the synod is still going to take place, where they're going to sort of reshape the faith and sort of rewrite the rules and whatnot. And because Shamal has sort of been the last one to see Vashaik, even though she's sort of was complicit in her murder, and because Bornu Blatt was the Inquisitor set out by Vashaik, they will sort of have enough power and sway in this council, in this synod, to sort of make sure that they shape it the way they want to, which will be sort of a good way and do the correct thing that religion should do, which is help the poor and heal those who are sick and whatnot. So Kanan Thrall and Satala come to, and they sort of flee the city, go off on their own adventures. So that's a thread that we might see again. We've got Dunsparrow and her squad of Marines, which there's not many of them, heading to Yigatan. I mean, that could be a whole story in itself. There was this really one weird scene that did not get picked up on again and felt like a loose end. After Adjunct Inkaras Solit died, back in like the middle of the book, he awakens on the shores of creation, and Vashaik appears to him and says something like, "You need to contemplate the true meaning of Otadriel, and what is Otadriel, and once you figure that out, then I'll give you the answers you seek." Don't know what that means, because Vashaik's now dead, and we don't see Inkaras Solit again, so I don't know what that's all about. Maybe we'll see that later. He's on the shores of creation. That's the last place we've seen Leoman of the Flails, so maybe there's a connection there. I don't know. That's it. That's book 2 of the Witness series. It's so cool to have this world that I love so much, and to get back into it, and to see new settings and new characters and new things, and to see the world changing and dynamic, and things weren't like they were before, but that doesn't mean I don't like them. It's just great. I'm so appreciative of Stephen Erikson and Ian C. Esselmont that they continue to keep writing. Like, they could easily have just wrote their 2 massive series, amazing series, and then sort of retired and said, "Look, there's my magnum opus, I'm done." But the fact that they keep writing, it's like Christmas every time they come up with a new book. And I love that this one is dedicated to, among other things, all the other booktubers who've plunged into the Malazan world. So I'm taking that personally, and thank you for dedicating this book to me and other people. Yeah, so that's an extremely long video of me talking all about everything that happened in No Life Forsaken, or at least everything that I could remember, and my struggles with making a connection between hasten and quick. Yikes. I did really like it, though. It made me really excited for Kirkhanis. I kind of want to just go back and start reading Forge of Darkness. But I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait until we have a Walk in Shadow release date, and then we'll do Forge of Darkness, Fall of Light, and then Walk in Shadow. That will be really exciting. And then presumably 2 more of these books. Crazy. And then we still have Path to Ascendancy. Like, we had Forge of the High Mage a few years ago. I'm sure there'll be another one of those out in a couple of years. If not, I'm still happy that we have the books that we have. So that is Stephen Erikson's No Life Forsaken.